Too good to be true, bro.
Oh,
Let me tell you.
people are not loving on Sailor. Checkmate. Truthfully, stuff like this has planning an early exit as a shareholder just horrendous and lots of cringe comments over there. People not liking the meme play from Sailor at the moment, but that could be reflective of share price. And you have to wonder people that are holding strategy. I'll go ahead to the over here. People that are holding strategy, by the way, we're currently just after locking in some nice gains on the long side, now short strategy. You have to wonder why the exit didn't occur significantly higher and why they're holding down over here. Maybe they have long-term plans. I'm not sure, but if they do, and let's pretend that they're long-term holders and they really believe in what strategy's doing, I imagine that euphoria is going to creep into them. And when you see the price rising above 500, headed towards 1,000, that they're going to be like, oh, whatever. Even still, not going over well today. Inverse head and shoulders strategy. Is it going to, obviously as Bitcoin goes, but I want to check that out over there. And this is a very clear inverse head and shoulders that's broken out. Looking good over there. And as Bitcoin goes in this particular moment, so will strategy. As the price of oil goes, so will the price of Bitcoin. It seems that we are seeing a little bit of movement shaping forth that can make this either a very welcomed weekend or a weekend where we even see a return to war. So big consequences are shaping up. We're looking at Bitcoin here trading at $76,844, and I put into the title 82K is the moment of truth if we have the opportunity to go ahead and take another look, just like some clean horizontal. You could see the 1-2 move into 82K. A breakout above there would probably send this off into a relief. I'm gonna put Robert. I'm gonna put out right here the most bearish case for Bitcoin that I could even imagine. So that's what we're gonna have fun looking at, the most bearish case for Bitcoin that I could even begin to imagine. Right now, we're looking at Ethereum and Cardano currently short. I saw a lot of developers, like a lot of developers have left the Ethereum Foundation. I don't know, maybe we could find some time to touch on that a little bit later. Let me move over here. And the question is, has my bearish case until October changed? Well, Robert, am I bearish to October? That one's got me. So hold on one second. So I could say that the seasonalities for midterm elections are bearish until October. That's without question. That historical data shows that during the midterm election year, we've seen significant drawdown between this period and then. Now, I question this, and let me go ahead and start this off. Just by the way, today we have new Fed chair, Kevin Wash, taking the seat. And I would say that Powell has left him probably the worst disaster any Fed chair has ever left. But you can see, even with the new Fed chair being sworn in, that's not what is the hot stories today. And we're seeing that we do have yesterday, the Pakistani Army chief said, I'm not flying over there. This morning, he's on his way to Tehran right now. Qatar has also sent a negotiating team, and we're seeing still a sharp separation between Iran saying they want to charge tolls for the Strait of Hormuz and they do not want to give up their enriched uranium, and the U.S. is saying for them both of those things are a non-starter. So are we going to see either one of the two make a concession, or are things about to go from bad to worse? And we all know if they do go from bad to worse, and that would be if we saw oil breaking out over here and headed towards that 140, guys, the ramifications across all risk assets is very clear. And seasonalities of midterm elections don't even matter. What matters is what takes place. A lot of people think through July the strait won't be open. There's like 75% chance by the end of the year it's open, and obviously that's variable depending on what happens. Seasonalities are bearish. I wonder, well, and I've brought this up multiple times, like we just had a pullback, and we just had a 12% pullback, and I question, we just had the pullback that you normally see during a midterm election years. Are we gonna get another pullback? If we see this situation miraculously resolved, then I would say there's a good chance we don't. I mean, guys, there's so much going on with the IPOs taking place. First, we're seeing SpaceX looking ready to go a couple of weeks, and now OpenAI is trying to move their liquidity event till September. Anthropic still to be seen what happens over here. I don't know if you saw, but Anthropic is reportedly on pace to become profitable for the first time ever. The company is expected to generate almost $11 billion in Q2 revenue. But I wonder what happens next quarter. And you see things like Microsoft is canceling their Claude Code license this week. The token-based billing is making the cost unattainable for them. And a lot of Anthropic's profits are coming from the enterprise level. Now you're seeing Microsoft pulling back. Uber CTO, Chief Technology Officer, sent an internal memo saying we've already burned through our entire 2026 AI budget in just 4 months. So was all the profits for Anthropic this year front loaded? And are we going to see a decline? That's something to watch out for. That's going to be really important for the space overall in the near term. So that's something that I'm watching as a potential flag. Now, you could see that Nvidia came in, and they came in with bombastic earnings, and we see earnings across the space, and we see things like the Chinese potentially able to attack the whole memory cartel, and I don't know who's going to want Chinese products in their build, but we'll find out. There's a lot that could go right. There's a lot that could go wrong. You have to wonder how all of this liquidity from the IPOs. Anthropic's not. I don't have a date for them yet, but we know that OpenAI is signaling September now that that court case is out of the way, and then you see Elon coming in June. That's back to back $1 trillion IPOs. It's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 trillion altogether. And that's all going to be a lot for the market to absorb. And then don't forget, 90 days after the SpaceX IPO, you'll be able to see that unlock. And I don't know what's going to happen. I remain pretty bullish. I mean, you all know I thought that this was an opportunity, seeing Mag 7 pull back between 50 and 30% names at that particular point in time. And since then, it wasn't like, okay, are we going to get a liquidity grab? We have really, really excelled up higher on the back of favorable earnings, continuing to increase their guidance. Now, that could all change very quickly in light of the situation that everyone is watching. And I don't know, and you don't know what happens today, tomorrow, through the weekend. And yep, if indeed oil drops like a rock, then the markets are going to be able to absorb this. And I think that there's probably a good chance the seasonalities we see are more along the lines of just the normal seasonalities. And people say this is the Trump seasonalities during Trump. I don't think so. This is just normal seasonalities. You could see the pullback coming from February through March, and then from then on in, yeah, August is generally a sideways choppy month. June is normally a good month. And same thing though, the most favorable come from October into the end of the year. That's that's a strong, strong, strong factor, and likely what happens. Could, in looking back, will it be more of the midterm? I don't know. I really don't know. I think that this is an extraordinarily difficult market, and I think that a lot of people, for sure, have missed this wave. This current wave is one of the biggest waves we've seen in the markets on equities in the past 12 months. And most people, because of the mega fear throughout March, were missed this move. And then you had the CTAs chasing, then the hedge funds finally now back to break even. And right now we're seeing buybacks return. That's a beautiful bid. CTAs, they kind of, you know, have exhausted their buying power, but there's still buyers this next week. If we see something go bad and we see the breakout in yields, the breakout in oil, then we're going to see obviously that cascade of the equity markets finally come home to roost. So it's dependent on what happens here. And I can't say it looks good. I could say both sides seem to be willing to try to come to agreement, but both sides seem to be on very, very far sides of the aisle. So I don't know how that's going to be done. If we looked at, and we've looked at before, if Bitcoin has bottomed in February, what the projection is into, well, I was going to say into the end of the year. Well, basically that structure that I've pointed out should be happening where I believe we are because of the Fed cycle. And then probably as we move into the end of the year, October, if it remains to be a favorable coming out of midterm elections, seasonalities for end of the year, then that could bode well for Bitcoin. Now, what about if that's completely erroneous and we're about to see uh we are about to see, I know we had in the beginning of the year a lot of calls for recession 2026, and I have to say I don't think any of those calls predicted or even speculated that the reason for the recession would be that oil would be not at $100 a barrel, but at $140 a barrel, causing demand destruction globally and in the United States, seeing yields blow out, causing liquidity crunch. Not one of them interpreted the macro to include that, but there were a lot of calls for it based on the 4-year cycle. And if that's what's happening and playing out, this is probably the most bearish chart that I could come up with and share with you. And my eyes are scanning, and that's why I didn't see it onto that little bit of. It started over here in NVIDIA though, and I'm looking at NVIDIA, and if you're looking zoomed out, and I'm saying, well, right now, and a lot of people, are on to, well, normally NVIDIA kind of, look at that beautiful breakout retest resumption into earnings. NVIDIA rises, and I think about it over the last couple of years, and wow, almost into every NVIDIA earnings, we've been into an unrealized profit. So yeah, NVIDIA definitely rises to earnings, then it sells off before consolidating. And is that just what we're seeing right now, or are we beginning to see signs of something deeper, potentially more dangerous occurring? And I was going to do a nice sell impulse line over here, and we've come into it and we've touched it. And if we are to break down over there, then there's a good chance that this is going to put a lot of pressure on the market. Now, yeah, Cabby, two things. First, make sure your short side is activated. And then the second, just go into the member area and just copy a fresh template, and then you'll have it for sure. All right, jumping over. And then from the video, I was like, well, what's going on with the semis? They've been going absolutely bombastic. And then I was like, well, all right. A lot of people thought that this might have been the bubble bursting. Here we are back to new all-time highs. I would say this is getting pretty freaky and worthy of watching for a correction as well. I guess sometimes 1.0 trend line breaks, perfect awareness, keep you on the right side. If you break down, and you could say someone that was really aggressive, Jord, like, I don't know how that works, but let's pretend. I like this line. Off of these two tests, this is one that I would be lining up in real time. And I could say, here's the breakdown. And then, guys, the way that you manage risk is sell impulse triggers. That's a steep ascent. And volatility begets volatility. And normally, off of steep ascents, you get strong whips and mean reversions. And this is not one of them. That didn't excel further. Michael Berry, I thought for a moment he probably was like, okay, yeah, I have the potential to get back to break even. I don't think he's going to have a good chance if the whole situation in Iran is settled. But the odds of that happening are pretty low, I imagine. At least the two sides are talking. What you do in this case is you either line up the buy impulse, stay on the right side, or you have what I believe is the right angle for that discretionary 1.0, which is pretty close to that. So as soon as you broke out above, that's when you manage your risk around, get back on the right side, and that's how you stay on the right side. And at this particular point in time, this is the angle to be watching to see if we have a breakdown. Anytime you make the all-time high, you got to be worried, but this could really continues its sent up. And then I was just looking at Bitcoin, and obviously Bitcoin is, from my view of where we are in cycle, and that's the Fed cycle, and that's the time when the Fed returns to balance sheet expansion from running off the balance sheet on quantitative tightening. At that particular point in time, normally what happens is Bitcoin makes a lower low. It made a massive lower low, and then stabilizes, for quite some time. But during the stabilization is in an upward sloping channel. And during that time, you see tech leading into a melt up. And that's happening again. Tech is melting up. And whether or not this is a bubble, obviously, I don't think so. And I think that if you look at the valuations and the earnings compare, it's a whole different ballgame. But you don't need you don't need it for it to become a bubble in order for it to pop. And in this case, I'll say pop being, well, if oil does break out and wound up becoming a crisis, it is going to have enormous ramifications across the macro. And if that's happening, listen, I don't care what's happening. The liquidity is going to be absolutely crunched. Rising dollar. We're going to see soaring yields. And Bitcoin is not immune if that were happening. In a perfect world is that we don't have 20% of the supply of energy choked off and cut off, and that returns to normal. Well, then I think that there's a strong probability that yes, the low is in, and that we're not headed into recession nor a global recession, and that we're going to see the Fed playbook play out exactly as we have planned and articulated. However, let's go back over here. Sorry, Cab, I was reading your message again. Let's look at what could be the most bearish circumstance that I could come up with. And I'm going to go ahead and just borrow this view that we've had where I've said to you, listen, it doesn't line up. The past cycles don't line up if you are using this all-time high, which is the all-time high, as the reference point. And you could see these deviations are everywhere. And then I was like, well, if you looked at actually what happened in January, right? So whether or not you're talking December 2004, January 2002, and if that's the all-time high, and then what pushed price to an actual structurally, and which pushed price to an all-time high was the flows into the spot ETFs, because they added $20 billion between these two periods. Then the checkmate, he confirmed. He said on chain, that's the case, George. That's exactly what happened. And if you then you say, well, these match up a lot more. That makes a lot more sense. And then this could potentially be the February low. But if you believe also that this was the structural high, even though price made a higher high, what does that remind you of? That reminds me of what happened over here in April and into May, and then what happened in November. Because price made a higher high, and structurally, people like Checkmate, people like TXMC trades, they say, well, this was the structural high, even though price made a higher high over here. And I mean, my own interpretation of that was, if the Fed never moved to tightening, tapering QE, and then raising rates, remember right here, rate shock 2022, then that wouldn't have been the high, but that is what happened. And that's the problem with fractals and cycles is, look, at this particular point in time, if the Fed moves towards trying to raise overnight Fed funds rate in order to bring in yields, which they have no control over, the 10-year, the market's in control of that. If the Fed moves towards tightening, then we're not seeing the Fed playbook as expected playing out. That would be completely different. I'm thinking about the question from Robert, how will they reduce inflation with QE? I don't think that the Fed is headed towards QE at any, like, I don't think that there's an imminent move to QE outside if some unforeseen circumstance arrives. I don't think, just like how long they ran off QT was a lot longer than the previous cycle and then the last cycle. I imagine where they are right now is that is maintained. Is it possible Wash comes in and he says, I told you I'm not in favor of balance sheet expansion, and all this not QA, all this reserve management balance sheet that Powell came up with some new term of organic balance sheet expansion. Yeah, is he going to stop that? That's going to be the first sign to see whether he stops it or not. I don't think he's going to be able to stop it. If he stops it, then maybe he's serious about wanting to reduce the balance sheet. Is he? He probably has one of the most difficult jobs that's ever been assigned to someone, but it wasn't much different than when Yellen took the chair, and it wasn't much different than when Powell took the chair, and it's probably not going to be any different when the next chair takes the chair. So the whole situation we're in continues to go from bad to worse. And then I'm reminded of what happened in Venezuela. But I digress. I don't know how they're going to reduce inflation. If we see the price of oil legitimately collapse, inflation is going to really collapse. It will be a one-off shock event. And not only that, the advancement of technology is extraordinarily deflationary at this stage with the advancement of AI. And you know what? Going forward, all the QE they could probably produce is not going to offset the deflationary pressure. Prior to what happened in Iran, we were seeing deflationary forces paramount. That's likely going to continue unless we see, obviously, energy spike further. Then inflation is going to be an absolute disaster. The market is going to run into a stagflationary environment. It's going to be bad news bears. I don't know what their response could be or how do they get out of it. I really have no idea. So if you believe that this was structurally the high and price made a higher high, and then you believe this is also the structural high and price made a higher high, And, I could say, well, the reason I gave you 20 billion of flows into the spot ETFs during that period, checkmate, confirms. That's his belief. That's exactly what on-chain shows. I don't know. And then you could say a couple of things. We'll start over here. Remember this one? This was 53,140 sell. And then take profits from all of wave 1, 2, get neutral. And then you could say, so I was connecting the low of that move. And that would have been an early warning sign. Price made a higher high, though, taking you out. This would have been, we had the early de-risk. Hold on one second. That's irrelevant right now. This is where we saw Bitcoin bull runs exit the market. But what I want to just point to you is simple structure. And it's this way. And I think that you'll appreciate this. And listen, just before we start, I believe we're over here. This is where I believe we are. And that means that the Fed has gone from reducing their balance sheet to increasing it. And I believe that's where we are today. And yep, this happened. And I don't know what happens next. Maybe it turns out to be this was the Iranian war. And it turns out that, things go from really bad to really worse. And the world realizes that, there's no easy out of this situation. And it's all out war. And you have multiple parties. Anyway, I don't want to get into that stuff. Y'all are very aware of what's happened. That could be obviously something that happened. And then maybe it's the alien invasion. What's with this whole, anyway, I don't want to go there either. I want to focus on this. So this is where I believe we are. And it doesn't mean that a major curveball won't be thrown at us. And also a major reason, Robert, for them to have to come back into outright QE. That's not going to solve the energy problem, but they might have no choice. And if that's happening, yes, it is going to be a repeat of what we saw in the past, where inflation is going to spiral out of control. And we're going to see a drastic, everyone is going to be aware of the K economy because it's going to grow so much more. Now, if this doesn't happen, if this weekend, if next weekend, if sooner than later, the situation is resolved, however that looks like, and by resolved meaning that we are seeing a return towards and normal flow through the Strait of Hormuz, then at that particular point in time, my base case, I believe, is going to play out. And I believe that we are headed towards probably some type of Bitcoin lagging behind, tech leading, and price stabilizing in an upward sloping channel. But check this out. And you go over here, and I'm going to point to this first. And notice that this is much closer and this is much wider, right? So you got more space between this one over here than what happened over here. This one's a little tighter, and then this one over here is longer. But don't forget, I'm saying the space here is longer also, and shorter here, shorter channel, shorter first breakdown channel. And then entering into this one over here. Price peaks up over here about, what is it, 45%, 42%. Price off of the low is currently pretty similar. 35. What is it exactly? 37%. Very similar. Different, but similar. And what else is also similar is that price took a liquidity grab up over here. Is that potentially what has happened over here? And then what happens if we have another set of potential legs down? Not just one leg down that you saw if you were looking and lining up from the all-time high and, oh, we got one more leg down. It's over. Great time to accumulate, out of the midterms, up only. Obviously, the year after midterm elections, historically very favorable. But that might not happen. If we see the situation go from bad to worse, if we're seeing oil over 140, then this bear market is likely just getting started. And that's the most bearish case for Bitcoin that I can lay out. And it's a conundrum because are we over here, closer to here right now? And are we going to see the shortest drawdown bear market that's ever occurred? And is it going to be because of obviously the new participants? Likely, unless we have alien invasion, an unknown event, which an unknown event would have been obviously closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a energy spike that's not able to return to normalcy. And for how long? It will end in a recession. It will end in a global recession first, and it's going to get ugly. So anyway, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news. I don't know what happens. And we see right now we have both sides that are talking. They seem to be far apart. One country says, I want your enriched uranium, and you are not able to charge tolls. The other side is like, we're charging tolls, and your enriched uranium is not leaving the country. And I don't know how that's reconciled. And I don't think more missiles are going to be able to do that. Appreciate that, y'all, as we head out Friday. So Robert, I don't believe, guys, it all comes down to what happens here. If this is resolved, I don't think that we see the historic seasonalities we've seen during midterm elections. I think we had that pullback ahead of the event. Obviously, I don't have to tell you, you all are very keenly aware of what's going on around us. That's all we have to do to navigate. I never would have believed that we would be riding positions of this caliber during these circumstances. Since war broke out, we have taken, I'm sorry, that's the wrong ones over here. These are the common V4. Sorry. Because TQQQ is holding a 4% unrealized gain, is not holding a 50% unrealized gain, right? Not even close. But I have to tell you, I would not have expected this type of momentum kicking to the upside under these circumstances. It's what's happening. And that right there to you is everything. Yeah, this is such a great. So let me talk about the SpaceX IPO for a moment. And I'll just put up a chart of Tesla because, well, it's an Elon thing. And guys, I have to tell you, up until recently, I was very interested in buying the SpaceX IPO. And at this particular moment, I'm not buying the IPO at all. I thought maybe, you know what? Why don't you get in at the IPO? And then probably you're going to have some tremendous upside price action. And I could just unwind that ahead of the lockout. And then I could, on the way down, I could go ahead and DCA in and I'm just going to stand on the sidelines. And if we see some hype phase behavior out of the SpaceX IPO, I am not going to FOMO. And I'm going to wait for the opportunity to come in there and DCA for the long term, only if the opportunity is given to me. I would rather save my money for the coming, hopefully, Anthropic IPO. And I believe that Anthropic continues to position themselves, that they are going to continue to be a leader. Again, I pointed out the unknown of what happens was the first quarter revenue of Anthropic kind of front loaded, and now all these enterprises realizing we don't have the money to continue spending, or are they going to be forced to spend in order to keep up? I don't have the answer to those questions, and we need time and data to figure it out. But I would think that, you know what? Yeah, in the long term, SpaceX pulls off what it intends on pulling off. And I'm not talking about, multi-planetary existence. I'm talking about being able to go ahead and build a Dyson swarm in the atmosphere that's powering massive amount of data. You already saw Elon was able to build that large data center in like, what was it, 128, less than 128, and now Anthropic's paying him $1.2 billion a month to use it. You know, I think that they're going to be able to use solar to power this Dyson swarm that is going to be able to power these data centers. And I think that this is going to be a massive success for SpaceX, except that I think that there's probably some time before we get there, you know? So the question though was how is the risk off played through other large POs such as Tesla or Meta, um, or Google for that matter, right? I mean, they all seem like liquidity events, right? That's funny. So, is SpaceX going to be a lot? I mean, guys, there's a massive amount. I read about one university that invested $50 million into SpaceX like a decade ago, and they've had a 3,000% return on their investment. Are they going to continue to hold that? I mean, or universities are tax advantage, right? Or are they going to go ahead and diversify out of that? I think that there's going to be a massive amount of people that are going to be in Austin alone. How many employees are expected to be worth over 100 million after the IPO? I look, I don't want to stand in the way of the liquidity. I'm not buying the hype. Could you see something like this where you see a massive shoot up in the beginning? Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if the first day the price opened up, closed higher than it opened, and or the FOMO continued for a little while. But if you believe in SpaceX, if you believe in Elon and what he's doing, I think that there's going to be time ahead after the hype phase to go ahead and accumulate a position. And obviously, if he's successful, it's going to be a good long-term hold position. And you can look at what happened recently with uh Circle. I mean, Circle, everyone here was wow. I think Deep Power, I think, wrote it up. Bought the IPO, massive, massive, massive FOMO, and then wound up being a massive liquidity event. This is, obviously out of the other ones we looked at, the most favorable as far as the move up. And I thought, oh yeah, let me buy the IPO. I'll unload, and then on the way down, I'll just wind up taking that stack and DCAing into it. And look, I'm expecting this, but I'm not going to participate in it because it might look like a lot of the other ones we just looked at where it is just, it could be, I don't know. I don't want to know. I think that either way, there'll be plenty of opportunity ahead for me to DCA in. This is the way that I've looked at it. I'm just not interested. I was very interested. How about you? Let me know who is and how they're playing it. This has been looking great, by the way. I still hold. I remember we brought it to everyone's attention. They're like a 2% fee. I was like, it's not going to matter. So, yeah. And then, so people that are buying or looking to buy the SpaceX IPO. Have you looked into this? BBTRX. Take a look at it. Ask Grok. Ask your favorite LLM some questions about it. It might be a good way to get in ahead of the IPO. Anyway. Yeah. Everyone's talking about hype. It's true. Whoa. I got the right ticker here, Michelle? Yeah. Wow. Yeah, but I don't have any insight to offer, unfortunately. So I don't have any insight to offer. Thank you. God bless you too. Thank you, brother. Appreciate that very much. Everyone, have a great weekend. It's Memorial Day in the US on Monday. We will be together again on Tuesday. If you're new here, welcome. Everyone else, welcome back. This is Jordan with Conquer Trading and Investing, and this is CTM. Everyone, God bless you. I'll see you all back here after the weekend.